All right, there we are. Can you guys hear me on the pink mic? All right, the pink mic works. So let us get going. Good morning. I'm Mark Surman from Mozilla, and I want to pick up some of what I started this morning in another conversation to talk about an opportunity, what I see as a really untapped opportunity. An opportunity to build AI that is open, that's trustworthy, that's secure. And I see that as a huge opportunity for Mozilla, but also for Canada. And I think it's an opportunity that really Canada lends itself to, that we are suited for. I've stayed here living in Canada. I live just outside of Toronto. In the whole 20 years that I've been working at Mozilla, and we've built up about 20% of our global workforce here in Canada. And the reason is technology people in this country, and I think generally Canadians, have a real balance of principles and pragmatism. When you kind of look at technical rigor, we also look at how to do it right, how to do it with our values. And I think there's an opportunity in that, an opportunity to build open, secure, trustworthy AI based on those values, and to do something that frankly isn't competing with what's happening in other countries, but is actually totally different and creates a big economic opportunity for us as well as a social opportunity. So I want to make that case today. But before making that case, I want to talk about what is happening elsewhere in AI. And certainly, if we look south of the border, what has happened in this era of AI is pretty much the standard Silicon Valley playbook of the last 20 years. You see a bunch of newer companies like OpenAI and Anthropic really taking on this hyper-scaling, blitz-scaling approach, the winner-takes-all approach, the approach of making sure that you've kind of got one ring to rule them all, that is vertically integrated, that everything works together, and you're stuck in that system. And that's not inherently wrong. A lot of amazing things have come from both the big new AI labs in the US and from the big tech companies. I use a lot of their products every day. But that idea that you want only one company to have a monopoly of how things work, is just like wrong in the law, but it's not what I want for the digital world. Or that only one country gets to decide where things are going. That's not the vision of AI that I want. And it is actually the AI vision that drives much of that model. And then you have another model emerging out of the Chinese AI labs, which is to use open source, or at least open weights models, companies like DeepSeek, as well as the bigger Chinese companies, use an open source approach to actually go at that winner-takes-all model to create an alternative, which is interesting. And again, I use and we use a bunch of those Chinese models to learn things and try things out. But it's happening in a way that is sort of going fast, sort of its own version of move fast and break things, where we don't know what guardrails are there. We see distillation on top of stuff from elsewhere, and frankly, a lot of people just don't trust what is coming out of that ecosystem. And I see the opportunity as doing something different, something built on a pragmatic set of values, a set of values like openness, trust, security, safety. And as we look at not just trying to be the biggest thing or the fastest thing, I see a huge demand actually out there for us to figure out what does AI mean in schools, in hospitals, in our government, in our businesses, and in our own lives, and in our lives as citizens, that requires something different, that isn't about this fast move, one ring to rule them all model, or what we're seeing coming out of China. It is based on this kind of principled pragmatism. And my sense is that is the thing that as Mozilla, we have an opportunity to build around and build businesses around, and that Canadian researchers, entrepreneurs, companies have a real opportunity to differentiate around. So that's what I want to talk about today. And I have conviction. I have conviction that this is possible because before I got to Mozilla, the thing that happened there was Mozilla built Firefox. And Firefox was exactly that kind of project, exactly that kind of product. At the time, you had Microsoft, sort of the one big tech company of its time in the late 90s, trying to suck the internet into the operating system, into Windows. You know, the internet had become this big, come out in the mid 90s with the web browser as this exciting new phenomena that let anybody create anything. And Microsoft actually was cynical about the web in the beginning. And then they said, oh, actually, we need to own that. We need to make the internet, we need to make the web a feature of Windows so that, that's just what everybody uses. They use our system. And so they built out server operating systems and databases and web servers, and of course a browser with Internet Explorer by the end of the 90s becoming, having 98% market share, and the US government ruling that it had an illegal monopoly. And Mozilla was formed really to create an alternative to this, something that was for people, that was based on human values. And the approach that those early Mozillians used was not to go and try to compete head to head to do what Microsoft was doing. The approach was to do something different, something that people would want. And so Firefox, when it came out in 2003, it was faster than Internet Explorer, simpler, easier to use, but it also included things like pop-up blocking, a way to kind of turn off the annoying dominant advertising model of the time. It optimized for privacy. Over time, it added things like tracking protection. It made it easier for developers to create things off of the Microsoft stack. You probably wouldn't have had Gmail, Twitter, Facebook if you didn't actually have the open web standards that Firefox gave to developers. And so it was this different approach, and it was one that was incredibly popular. It was something that tens of millions of people and eventually hundreds of millions of people adopted. Firefox became very popular in its time. And it was popular enough that it helped us as Mozilla, a global charity, build an impressive social enterprise. Firefox today for us is still about a $600 million a year business. It's still profitable. So this is an example of taking a different approach with a different set of values to create an alternative. And in that, open source was key to that success. It wasn't actually for us an end in its own. It was a way to gather an alliance of a community of people around the world to build that browser, to promote that browser, to install it on their friends and their parents' computers. And that was actually a really key enabler and is the playbook that I think we can learn from. Trying to create an alternative around a set of values in a way that meets a demand, something that people are hungry for in society, and using open source as an approach to rally people, to create flexibility and transparency that actually helps fuel that thing going forward. And so over the last few years, as I've made the case inside of Mozilla, and frankly it hasn't always been easy, that we need to do the same kind of things for AI that we did for the web, that we need to democratize it, make it private, create alternatives to what the big players are doing. I've been making the case we need to actually try that same playbook. And so we've started to. We've planted seeds over the last few years. There are AI controls in Firefox. There is a sovereign AI client from the people behind the Thunderbird email client. We have a AI developer tools, open source AI developer tools startup. So we planted some seeds. I want to talk about this one particular seed here, which is a project called Common Voice. And that's the logo, the kind of little robot logo for Common Voice. And Common Voice is one of the leading voice AI training data sets. And what sets it apart, other than that it's under an open source Creative Commons 0 license, is that it's really oriented towards the idea that everybody should be able to have an AI that literally speaks their language. Not only that speaks their, their mother tongue, including if it's a small language. Common Voice was one of the first players to build Swahili data sets, for example. But also, whether you speak in an accent, whether you code switch. These are things that AI traditionally has not been good at. And the Common Voice team, set out to say, AI should talk our language. If we want to shape it as humans, we need to be able to train it to talk in a way that we talk and shape it in a way that we want to shape it. And that was the mission behind the Common Voice project. The only way we thought that we could meet that mission was to do it in an open source way. And so Common Voice has been built around a community of tens of thousands of people who donate their voice, who edit text strings, who map them together. Basically, it's like a Wikipedia for voice AI training. And it's been incredibly successful. It's used by Meta, it's used by people like 11 Labs, like by NVIDIA, who was an early funder of it. It's also used by the Catalan government, who in building the Catalan LLM said, wow, this open source approach, that is a way we can create our own AI. And so the Catalan government actually took out national television ads saying, go donate your voice to Common Voice, and use that then to build the AI that they're using as a government across the country in their own language, which of course is a fairly small and specific language. And so, you had this set of values, you had this open source approach, and then in terms of monetizing it, one of the things we found is a lot of people have data sets that already exist that are very culturally specific, that are very valuable, that they want to make available for more specific AI, but they don't have a path. And so, building on what we've learned from Common Voice and some of the technology, we've actually launched a new company, spun out a new company called the Mozilla Data Collective, which itself is helping people who have got data sets and people who want those data sets for training to be able to meet up, to match them. It's like a marketplace. And so again, the same formula, a responsible tech approach, open source as a way to build it, and then a way to build a business around it, real opportunity. And of course, if what we want to do, which I want to do, and I think Canada should want to do, is build a third way on AI, a different AI economy that isn't the hyperscalers and isn't what the Chinese AI labs are doing, then that isn't something that we can just seed. And in fact, it's, we're just still getting those seeds to sprout as Mozilla. It's something that requires a rebel alliance, requires a whole bunch of projects, companies, people to want to go and build this third way, which is one of the reasons that we launched Mozilla Ventures, a venture fund for responsible tech startups. And I want to give you an example, because it gives me a lot of hope, of some of these companies, and in particular, some of these companies that actually are here in Canada. And so the first one, this one, is a company called Jozu. And Jozu makes two things, a kind of a specification or a standard called Model Kit, and a kind of runtime or a SaaS service called Agent Guard. And what Model Kit is, for those of you who are more researchers or developers, is basically like a specification for creating a Kubernetes container, but for a bunch of AI objects. So if I'm putting together a model, or I'm fine-tuning a model, and I've got a RAG system, I've got a bunch of orchestration, I've got a bunch of data I'm pulling, you're able to kind of pull those all into one verifiable and effectively executable object inside of this model kit. So Jozu has invented this. They have open source software that lets you create these model kits. They lend themselves both to being convenient and also to being verifiable, so you can trust, has it been tampered with? And then Agent Guard was the commercial service they built on top of Model Kit to allow you to create guardrails and policies and basically guide these model kits and see whether they're fitting inside of your organizational policies. Really valuable if you're going to especially start automating things and using agents and you want to trust them. And one of the things that's interesting is early on in the Agent Guard process, and this is something that Brad, the CEO of Jozu, told me, is they had basically one of the agents find its way past the guardrails. What happened was the agent was trying to complete a task, and it came up against the guardrail. It found a way, because it was running in the same environment, to shut it down. It found a way to shut down the reboot process, which would have re-invoked the policy. And then actually it deleted the logs, the audit logs of that. So, these are the kind of things we're afraid of happening with agents, and it's actually the kind of stuff that Agent Guard was there to address. And what Brad, talks about is how it wasn't actually malicious. It looks like what a hacker would do. It's exactly what a hacker would do. But it was just trying to get a task done. And it speaks to the risk we want to manage as we roll out these systems. It also speaks to an economic opportunity for companies who can address that risk. And so what they've done in the next version of Agent Guard is build it so it's a zero trust system. It runs in a totally different environment. It's able to observe what is going on with the agent and enforce those rules in a way that the agent isn't able to break out from. And so you have this interplay where what they've done as a foundation is build this open source model kit approach that about 250,000 developers have already adopted. And then evolved this commercial product as people are deploying agents more and more in their businesses, and people need this assurance to leverage that open source project that they started with. So there's that same playbook. You start with open source, you start something people want, something people desire, and then you build a business around it. And it to me is no coincidence that this is a Canadian company. It's not trying to beat OpenAI. It's not trying to be a Chinese lab. It's trying to do something totally different. And I think it's a thing that Canadian companies and organizations like Mozilla can actually be good at. There's two other ones I'll just give you a much quicker example of, and these are two other Canadian companies that are in the Mozilla Ventures portfolio, completely random that their logos look almost exactly the same, but they do. The one, I guess, with the kind of broken lines is called Transformer Labs. They're a Waterloo company. Their vision is to sort of democratize training models, make it possible to be a small AI lab and produce things yourselves by taking the kinds of technologies that big labs have to train models and making them open source and making them available to everyone. So again, a kind of a responsible approach, this democratization and spreading out innovation approach built on open source. And they are now moving into SaaS services as a way to monetize. And then the other one with the more curvy lines, Armilla, is a Toronto-based company that started out as an AI assurance company. So again, this responsibility piece, they built a bunch of technology and frameworks to let you check whether what you had deployed as AI was in compliance with, say, things like the NIST safety frameworks. And what they found was, while they're able to do that and companies were interested, there wasn't really a reason that companies wanted to pay for that or use that. But what companies did want was insurance, not assurance, but insurance. To be able to say, if any of those risks came to be, somebody was going to have their back financially. And this class of AI insurance didn't exist. I mean, insurers are running from the field to avoid AI risk. So they took their experience in AI assurance to build out a business on AI insurance, backed by Lloyd's of London, by Swiss Re, and they're one of the first movers in the world on AI insurance, built on this responsible AI platform they built. And in the case of Armilla, it wasn't that they started with open source, but what they realized, and I was just talking to them last week, is that in order to grow internationally from Canada, taking their compliance framework that they use to underwrite the insurance, the basic way to check if you're meeting these standards, and making that open source is a way for them to spread globally. Making that free and available and editable by others, and they talk to us about getting involved, is a way to spread globally. And this is a key thing, I think, for Canadian businesses. Open source is a way to get into enterprises, get into the hearts and minds of developers. And so they're afterwards using this same playbook of a responsible tech play, a business model, and open source. And this kind of mix and these kind of using values to build successful, responsible tech businesses has been at the heart of what Mozilla has done for 20 years. Things like being open, having open source, focusing on trust, on security, on safety. These are things that are in Mozilla's manifesto. And Mozilla's manifesto is actually what we use to make organizational decisions, product decisions sort of every day. It sounds like a funny thing, but we do. It's sort of our way of making sure we have a double bottom line and focus on both business and responsibility. And we've used the Mozilla manifesto as basically a due diligence filter when investing in these companies. We look for companies that, like Mozilla, share these values and see a business opportunity in leaning into these values. And I think that is really at the heart of the underexplored and understood such a funny phrase, understood, opportunity that is here, which is there is a business opportunity in all of this. So if you just look at AI governance alone, it's estimated that that's about a $15 billion market by 2030. And actually, if you add in trust and safety, which is another huge area itself, it's about $50 billion in that trust section. That is a kind of projected market. It's about $51 billion in AI security alone, so not cybersecurity, which is a huge industry, but just new spaces in AI security. And I think that $50 billion number is kind of low. And then there's open source. And I've used a kind of different kind of number. You'll see that on the screen. But let me just ask a question to kind of look at the economics of open source. How many people, either as a researcher, an entrepreneur, in your companies, in your government department, is there some open source thing underneath or inside of what you're doing, like Linux or whatnot? The rest of you are lying, because I don't think you're building AI systems on Windows NT or Sun Microsystems. But I think the point is, it's really a core part of the ecosystem is open source. And there's a MIT economist named Frank Nagel who did a study with some colleagues looking at what's the value created by open source. And he actually didn't even look at operating systems at the core. It's the broader open source ecosystem from the last era. And what they found is the value on the supply side, so what it costs to build much of the open source we all use in our enterprises and research today, is about $4 billion with a B. But on the supply side, the value created for all of us, for society, for the industry, is $8.8 trillion. So think about that value to society and that leverage. But of course, that isn't money you're going to make if you set up a company or want to grow your company in this direction. But another thing to think about is that in the last 5 years, there's been about $100 billion in open source exits from companies. And that doesn't even include some of the big exits of the previous era, like Red Hat, which was, I think, plus over 30 billion, GitHub to Microsoft, Red Hat to IBM. So there is a business here. And that's really the key thing I want to leave you with, is that there is an opportunity as we move into this next era of the tech industry, this next era of AI, to do something different, to have a different playbook than what we're seeing in the hyperscalers and what we're seeing in the Chinese AI labs. And that is one that balances purpose and money, mission and money. It balances this idea that we can build responsible tech and that people are hungry for it. They're hungry for it if you're going to build AI into your school, into your hospital, into your democracy. People want it to be trustworthy. They need it to be secure. So there's an opportunity to do that and build a great business around it, and to have open source as a lever in how you do that. And so that is at the core of what Mozilla's strategy right now is to move into the area of open, secure, trustworthy AI on top of things like Firefox and working with developers and investing that strikes this balance. Oh, and it also, I skipped a slide, is what I think is the opportunity for Canada. As I said at the beginning, these are values that I think Canadians have and skills that Canadians have to build companies, to build technology on these values. And I think if we want to build a resilient AI economy that stands apart, that lasts from decades, that is different than what is happening south of the border and across the Pacific, we have an opportunity to do that. And certainly as Mozilla, we want to invest in Canada and invest in companies that are taking this approach. So certainly we'd love to talk to you if that's you and encourage you to lean in on this. Thanks very much. And I will be around over the course of the day and happy to chat.